The heavy iron doors of the High Hall did not open with a grand announcement. They were shoved apart, the sound echoing like a cracked bell against the black marble walls. Then came the chains. The harsh, metallic scraping of thick iron dragged across the stone floor. It was a sound designed to humiliate, to announce to the entire Obsidian Peak Kingdom that their ruler had been broken. King Cailan was pulled into the light of the silver torches. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered and built for war. But right now, his body was weighed down by iron shackles binding his wrists and throat. Blood, dark and drying, crusted at the corner of his mouth. The poison running through his veins had sealed his wolf, leaving him entirely human. But as he was forced to his knees before the throne he had built, Cailan did not look like a defeated man. His storm-grey eyes were cold. His jaw was locked. He did not bow his head. Around the grand hall, the pack watched. Some sneered, some whispered. Most simply stared, intoxicated by the sudden fall of a terrifying alpha. "Look at him." Lord Vane's voice drifted down from the steps of the throne. Vane wore a tailored coat, his posture reeking of unearned authority. The great conqueror, brought down not by an army, but by his own blind trust. Vane descended the steps slowly, stopping right in front of the kneeling king. He reached out and forcefully unclasped the heavy wolf fur cloak from Cailan's shoulders. The garment fell to the dirty floor, stripping Cailan of his royal armor. Then Vane grabbed Cailan's chained hand. With a brutal yank, he pulled the cracked obsidian signet ring from the king's finger. The court murmured in dark satisfaction. The transfer of power was complete. In the deepest shadows of the hall, hidden behind a towering stone pillar, Ilara watched. She wore the rough, grey linen dress of a nameless servant. Her knees ached from hours of scrubbing the freezing stone floors. In front of her sat a wooden basin of dirty water. She was supposed to keep her head down. She was supposed to be invisible. For 10 years, her silence had been her armor. But as she watched the king stripped of his dignity, something ancient and furious clawed at the inside of her ribs. Her pale violet eyes stayed fixed on Cailan. Under the frayed sleeve of her dress, the faint crescent moon birthmark on her wrist began to burn. It felt like a branding iron pressing against her skin. Ilara did not gasp. She did not whimper. Instead, she gripped the wooden edge of the water basin so tightly that a splinter pierced her palm. She focused on the sharp sting of her bleeding hand, using the physical pain to force the glowing mark back into dormancy. She forced her blood to quiet down. She could not save him right now. If she spoke, if she revealed the White Queen's bloodline pulsing in her veins, Vane would kill them both before the sun set. "Take him to the Underdungeon," Vane commanded, turning his back on Cailan and examining the obsidian ring in his palm. "Let the cold rot the rest of his pride." 2 massive guards grabbed the chains attached to Cailan's collar. They yanked him violently, dragging him toward the heavy wooden doors that led to the subterranean prison. As he was dragged past the pillar, Cailan's head shifted. The hall was filled with hundreds of gloating faces, but his storm-grey eyes bypassed all of them. They pierced straight into the suffocating darkness where Ilara knelt. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met her pale violet ones. He did not know her name. He did not know she was a servant. He only saw a quiet shadow that refused to look away from his ruin. Deep inside Kaelin's chest, beneath the heavy suppression of the poison, his black wolf stirred. It did not snarl in pain. It did not rage against the chains. Instead, a low, vibrating rumble vibrated in Kaelin's throat. A sound of impossible recognition. The guards jerked the chains again, breaking the connection. The heavy doors to the underdungeon slammed shut, plunging the king into darkness, and leaving Elara alone with her bleeding hand and a dangerous, undeniable truth. The underdungeon smelled of frost, iron rust, and centuries of forgotten despair. Down here, the cold did not just bite the skin, it seeped into the bones, turning every breath into a cloud of white mist. King Kaelin hung suspended by heavy iron chains bolted to the damp stone wall. His arms were pulled taut above his head, forcing him to bear his own massive weight. The physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in his blood. The poison Seraphina had slipped into his wine was ancient. It was designed to slowly sever an alpha from his beast, burning through his veins like liquid fire. Kaelin's jaw locked as a violent tremor wrecked his body. His black wolf was thrashing blindly inside his mind, enraged, confused, and slowly suffocating. He pulled against the chains. The metal groaned, cutting into his wrists, but the stone held firm. He was trapped. He was losing his wolf. Then, the softest sound broke the heavy silence, the faint brush of fabric against stone. Kaelin's storm-grey eyes snapped open. Even weakened, his predatory instincts flared. He let out a low, vibrating growl, a stark warning to whoever had come to gloat in the dark. From the shadows, a small figure emerged. It was the servant girl from the High Hall. She still wore the same coarse, grey linen dress, the hem now stiff with frozen mud. In her hands, she carried a cracked wooden bowl filled with clean water and a torn piece of cloth. She stepped into the dim light of the single torch flickering in the corridor. Kaelin's muscles coiled. He expected fear. He expected her to tremble, to drop the bowl and run from the snarling alpha. She did neither. Elara walked toward him with a stillness that defied logic. There was no hesitation in her steps, no scent of terror in her blood. She possessed an absolute, unshakable calm, like a deep lake that refused to ripple under a storm. As she stepped within arm's reach, something inexplicable happened. The agonizing burn in Kaelin's chest suddenly dulled. The frantic, thrashing black wolf inside his mind stopped fighting the poison. Instead, it circled once, let out a soft huff of breath, and settled down. It was not a surrender to the poison, it was a surrender to her presence. Kaelin stared at her, stunned. He had never felt his beast submit to anyone, let alone a frail human servant. Elara knelt on the freezing stone. She dipped the cloth into the clean water, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Reaching up, she pressed the damp, freezing cloth against the dried blood on his jaw. Kaelin flinched slightly at the sting, but her touch was incredibly light. "Who sent you?" His voice was a harsh, gravelly whisper, ruined by the cold and the poison. Elara did not answer. She merely rinsed the cloth and moved to wipe the grime from his brow.
Thank you.
"Speak to me," Kaelin demanded, though the fierce edge of his alpha command was entirely missing. It was almost a plea. "If Vayne catches you here, he will kill you. Why are you risking your neck for a fallen king?" Elara stopped. She looked directly into his storm-grey eyes. Her pale violet gaze was ancient, holding a depth of sorrow that made Kaelin's breath catch in his throat. Slowly, she shook her head. Then, she raised a single finger and pressed it gently to her own lips. "I cannot speak." Before Kaelin could process the weight of her silence, the heavy thud of armored boots echoed down the spiral staircase. Torches flared brighter in the corridor. Voices barked harsh commands. Vayne was coming. Panic flickered in Alara's eyes for the first time. She grabbed the wooden bowl, her knuckles turning white. Kaelin gave her a sharp, urgent nod, gesturing toward the deep, narrow alcove behind a collapsed stone pillar. Elara scrambled backward, slipping into the suffocating darkness of the crevice, just as the iron gate to Kaelin's cell swung open. Lord Vayne stepped in, flanked by 2 towering guards wielding thick wooden batons. Vayne's breath plumed in the freezing air as he smiled down at the chained Kay. "Has the cold humbled you yet, Kaelin?" Vayne mocked, stepping closer. "Or do we need to break a few ribs to remind you who rules Obsidian Peak now?" From the pitch-black alcove, Elara pressed her back against the freezing stone. She bit down on her own wrist, her teeth sinking into the flesh just above her crescent moon birthmark. She had to stay silent. As the heavy, sickening sound of wood striking flesh echoed through the dungeon, Elara closed her eyes. Kaelin did not scream. He did not beg. He took the punishment in absolute, unbroken silence. And in the dark, she bled for him. "Nothing," Lord Vayne sneered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He tossed the wooden baton to one of his guards. "Not even a groan? You always were too proud for your own good, Kaelin." King Kaelin remained suspended by the heavy chains, his chest heaving with slow, measured breaths. New bruises darkened his ribs and jaw, yet his storm-grey eyes stared through Vayne with the chilling indifference of a predator watching a dying insect. He did not grant the usurper the satisfaction of a single word of pain. Frustrated by the king's unbreakable silence, Vayne reached into his tailored coat. He pulled out the cracked obsidian signet ring he had stolen in the high hall. "I thought I would wear this," Vayne said, turning the black stone in the torchlight. "But it is flawed, broken, just like your reign." With a dismissive flick of his wrist, Vayne threw this. A heavy ring. It clattered against the damp stone floor, spinning before coming to a stop near the iron bars of the cell. "Leave it," Vayne ordered the guards. "Let him stare at the rubble of his kingdom until the cold takes him." The iron gate slammed shut. The heavy boots of the traitors faded up the spiral staircase, leaving the underdungeon to its suffocating silence once more. From the pitch-black alcove, Elara finally let out a shaky breath. She stepped out of the shadows. Her pale violet eyes were wide, taking in the battered state of the Alpha King. She moved quickly, dropping to her bruised knees beside the wooden bowl she had hidden earlier. She wrung out the cold cloth and reached up to his face. As she leaned in, The damp, rotting smell of the dungeon was suddenly pierced by something else. It was incredibly faint, buried beneath the scent of cold stone and iron chains. But to Kaelin's heightened senses, it was like a sudden strike of lightning. Dried lavender. It was a quiet, unassuming scent, but the moment it hit his senses, it bypassed the deadly poison completely. The heavy, burning fog in Kaelin's blood parted. The frantic black wolf in his mind did not just settle this time. It surged forward with a fierce, territorial possessiveness that rattled Kaelin's bones. His beast recognized her. Not as a servant, not as a stranger. Kaelin's breath hitched. He looked down at the fragile woman wiping the grime from his neck. For the first time, he truly looked at her. He saw the frayed edges of her cheap grey dress. He saw the purple bruises on her knees from a lifetime of scrubbing floors. And then, he saw her wrist. Just above a faint crescent moon birthmark, there were fresh, deep teeth marks. She had bitten her own flesh to keep herself from crying out while he was being beaten. A profound, suffocating weight settled over Kaelin's chest. It was not the poison. It was guilt. He had built the strongest army in the continent. He had conquered borders and accumulated wealth. Yet, sitting right here in the darkest corner of his own castle was a woman who bled for him. A woman he had sworn an oath to protect when he took the throne, and he had never even noticed her existence. I commanded legions, Kaelin rasped, his voice thick with an emotion he could barely contain. I knew the names of 1,000 warriors. Yet I do not know the name of the only soul who stayed when my kingdom fell. Ilara's hand froze. Tell me your name, Kaelin pleaded softly. The absolute authority of the Alpha King was gone, replaced by a desperate need for the truth. Please. Ilara looked into his storm-grey eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the White Queen's blood rushing hot in her ears. But the vow she had made to survive was too deep. If she spoke, the magic sealing her true scent and power would break. Vayne would find her, her pale violet eyes filled with a quiet apology. Slowly, she shook her head. She pulled her hand back, lowering her gaze to the floor as she stepped away from him.
Why didn't you?
She retreated toward the shadows, needing the safety of the dark. But as she took a step backward, the heel of her worn boot bumped against something hard on the freezing stone. Ilara looked down. There, resting in the frost and dirt, was the cracked obsidian signet ring, the ultimate symbol of the Obsidian Peak, the very weight of the Alpha Kingdom, now lying quietly at the feet of a nameless, silent servant. The echoing click of luxury heels on the dungeon's stone stairs was a sound that did not belong in the dark. Lady Seraphina descended into the underdungeon, wrapped in a heavy cloak of white fox fur that starkly contrasted with the filth around her. Her lips were painted a cruel shade of crimson, and in her gloved hand she held a small glass vial filled with a thick, black liquid. She stopped outside Kaelin's cell, a look of profound disgust crossing her flawless features. "Look at you," Seraphina purred, stepping through the iron gate left unlocked by the guards. The terrifying King Kaelin, reduced to a stray dog shivering in the dark. Kaelin slowly raised his head. His storm-grey eyes were dim with exhaustion, but the hatred in them burned cold and sharp. "Seraphina," he rasped. "Vain, obedient shadow." Seraphina's smile tightened. She stepped closer, lifting the vial to the torchlight. "Vain thinks the poison you drank is enough. He thinks time and cold will finish your beast. But I know better. A lichen of your bloodline is never truly broken until the heart stops." She stepped within arm's reach of him. "This will not kill you, Kaelan, but it will permanently rot the wolf inside you. You will live the rest of your short, pathetic life as nothing more than a weak, human shell." She reached out, grabbing Kaelan's jaw to force his mouth open. From the shadows behind the stone pillar, Ilara's breath hitched. She saw the lethal black liquid. If Kaelan drank that, the bond between his human soul and his beast would be permanently severed. He would die in agony. Ilara had no weapons, she had no voice, but she had absolute resolve. Without a second thought, she threw her weight against the heavy iron bucket she had brought down earlier. Clang! The sharp, deafening crash of metal against stone echoed through the dungeon, violently interrupting the silence. Water spilled everywhere, rushing across the freezing floor. Seraphina gasped, dropping Kaelan's jaw and spinning around. The vial slipped in her gloved hand, spilling half of its toxic contents onto the dirt. "Who is there?" Seraphina shrieked, her aristocratic composure shattering. Ilara did not hide. She stepped out into the dim torchlight, her head bowed perfectly, playing the role of a terrified servant who had simply tripped in the dark. Seraphina's eyes narrowed as she took in the cheap grey dress, the pale skin, and the dirt on Ilara's face. The false Luna's fear instantly morphed into vicious rage. "You filthy, clumsy rat!" Seraphina hissed. She stormed across the cell, raising her hand. Smack! The back of Seraphina's hand cracked sharply against Ilara's cheek. The force of the blow threw Ilara off balance. She collapsed onto the freezing, wet stone, her lip splitting open. But Ilara did not cry out. She simply knelt there, tasting the metallic tang of her own blood, her pale violet eyes staring blankly at the stone floor. She had bought him time. That was all that mattered. But she had miscalculated one thing. She did not realize what the scent of her blood would do to the Alpha King. The moment the scent of crushed lavender and fresh blood hit Kaelan's senses, a primal, earth-shattering fury detonated inside him. The poison suppressing his wolf was instantly incinerated by the sheer force of his protective instinct. "Don't touch her!" Kaelan's voice was not human. It was the raw, terrifying roar of a true alpha whose mate had just been struck. His massive muscles bulged, veins straining against his skin as he threw his entire body weight forward. The thick iron chains pulled taut. The stone wall groaned. Wit. A deafening crack. The thick iron ring bolted into the stone wall splintered. One of his chains broke free. Seraphina screamed. She stumbled backward, tripping over her expensive furs in absolute terror as the massive king lunged toward her, stopped only by the remaining chain on his other arm. His storm-grey eyes were now bleeding into a terrifying, predatory amber. "Get out," Kalen snarled, his voice vibrating the very air in the dungeon. "Or I will tear you apart with my bare hands." Serafina did not wait. She scrambled to her feet, leaving the vial of poison shattered on the floor, and ran up the spiral staircase, sobbing in terror. The heavy iron door slammed shut at the top of the stairs. In the cell, Kalen's sudden burst of godlike strength vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The poison rushed back in to fill the void. He gasped, his knees buckling, and he collapsed heavily onto the freezing floor, hanging by his one remaining chained arm. His chest heaved. He was entirely spent. Ilara slowly pushed herself up from the wet stone. She wiped the blood from her split lip. Moving with quiet grace, she crawled across the freezing floor until she was right beside him. Kalen kept his eyes closed, his breathing ragged and shallow. He had broken iron for her. He had risked his last ounce of life for a servant whose name he didn't even know. Ilara hesitated for only a second. Then she reached out. She placed her small, calloused hands over his massive, bruised fist. It was a gesture of profound intimacy. A silent vow that he was not fighting alone. As her fingers interlaced with his, the crescent moon birthmark hidden beneath her grey sleeve began to hum, pulsing with a faint, warm silver light in the dark. The cold in the underdungeon deepened as the night wore on, turning the damp air into a physical weight. King Kalen lay on the freezing stone floor, his breathing shallow. Breaking the iron chain had cost him the very last reserves of his strength. The poison was creeping back into his veins, turning his limbs to lead and bringing a bone-deep, uncontrollable shiver to his massive frame. Ilara did not leave him. She crawled closer, shifting her small body until she was pressed against his broad, battered chest. She wrapped her arms around him, offering the fragile warmth of her own body to fight off the creeping frost. It was an act of quiet desperation. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, her ash-silver hair spilling over his torn, bloodied shirt. As she shifted closer, the frayed neckline of her coarse linen dress slipped. From beneath the fabric, a necklace slid out, falling onto Kalen's chest with a soft clink. Kalen forced his heavy eyelids open. Resting against his skin was a pendant made of pure white stone. It was cracked down the middle, worn by time and secrecy, but the faint, ancient runes carved into its surface were unmistakable. It emitted a very faint, almost imperceptible silver glow in the dark. Kalen's breath caught. His storm-grey eyes widened as his mind raced back through the ancient texts and pack histories he had memorized as a young prince. White stone, ancient runes, the faint, undeniable hum of pure lunar magic. This was not a cheap trinket stolen by a servant. This was the moon tear, the sacred crest of the silver moonblood, the original royal line of the White Queens, a bloodline the world believed had been hunted to extinction centuries ago. Slowly, Kalen lifted his heavy, unchained hand. He traced the edge of the cracked white stone, then moved his gaze up to Ilara's face. He looked at the translucent paleness of her skin, untouched by the sun. He saw the ash-silver hue of her hair hidden beneath the grime. He remembered the absolute, unnatural stillness she possessed, a dignity that no ordinary servant could ever fake. And the scent. the pure, calming lavender that had instantly bypassed his poison to awaken his wolf. She was not a mute servant. She was a hiding queen. "You," Kaelin whispered, his voice trembling not from the cold, but from profound shock. "You are the last of them." Ilara's pale violet eyes met his. She did not panic. She did not try to hide the stone away. She simply looked at him, her silence confirming everything he had just realized. A crushing wave of sorrow hit them. He, Alpha King. She carried the most sacred bloodline in their world. Yet she had spent her life scrubbing the floors of his castle, swallowing her voice to survive in the shadows of his reign. She had been forced to be nothing, while he sat on a throne he believed he had earned. Yet when he fell, when his own council betrayed him and his armies turned their backs, the White Queen had stayed in the dark with him. Kaelin reached up, his rough, scarred fingers gently brushing the bruised cheek where Seraphina had struck her. His touch was incredibly tender for a man built for war. "I was a fool," Kaelin rasped, his eyes burning with unshed emotion. "I conquered the borders, but I was blind to the true royalty standing inside my own walls." He pressed his forehead against hers. "If the ancestors grant me one more sunrise, I swear to you on my wolf's soul, I will tear this dungeon apart, and I will put you where you belong." It was a vow, a true Alpha's pledge, spoken in the dirt far away from any throne. Ilara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. For a fleeting second, she felt a profound, overwhelming sense of safety. Yet he did not stumble. Kaelin walked with his spine perfectly straight. His broad shoulders were pulled back. His storm-grey eyes stared straight ahead, completely unbothered by the venomous insults and mocking laughter hurled at him from the crowd. He was a king walking to his death, and he refused to give the traitors the satisfaction of seeing him break. At the center of the courtyard stood the execution block, a raised platform of black stone slick with ice. Lord Vane stood at the top of the steps, wrapped in thick furs, looking down at the crowd with manufactured authority. Beside him stood false Luna Seraphina, her chin raised, trying to mask the lingering terror in her eyes from her encounter in the dungeon. The guards shoved Kaelin to his knees before the block. The impact sent a jolt of pain through his battered body, but his expression remained carved from ice. Vane unrolled a parchment with a dramatic flick of his wrist. "King Kaelin of Obsidian Peak." Vane's voice carried over the courtyard, amplified by the silent, expectant crowd. "You stand accused of treason against the pack. You have abused your absolute power, hoarded the kingdom's wealth, and driven our armies into endless, senseless wars." It was a beautiful, calculated lie. Kaelin had fought to secure their borders, so the pack could sleep in peace. He had bled so they would not have to. But a crowd hungry for a new spectacle rarely cared for the truth. As Vane continued to read the fabricated list of crimes, Kaelin tuned out the words. His storm-grey eyes swept the crowd. He was not looking for loyalists. He was not hoping for a rescue. He was looking for a flash of grey linen. He found her standing near the back, hidden among the lower servants and stable hands. Ilara was perfectly still, Her head was bowed, the ash silver of her hair concealed under a tattered hood. She looked like just another nameless face in the crowd, but Kaelin knew better. He knew the White Queen's blood pulsed in her veins. He knew the cracked white stone rested against her chest, right next to where she had likely hidden his discarded obsidian ring. Kaelin held her gaze across the sea of traitors. He gave her a single, imperceptible nod, a silent command from a dying alpha. Stay hidden. Survive. Vane rolled up the parchment. By the ancient laws of the Pack, the penalty for such treason is death. M.A. The ancestors judge your soul, for I offer no mercy. Vane gestured to the executioner, a towering brute gripping a massive double-edged broadsword. The crowd went dead silent. The only sound was the howling of the winter wind cutting across the courtyard. The executioner stepped forward, his boots crunching on the snow. He gripped the hilt of the broadsword with both hands and raised the heavy blade high into the grey sky. The polished steel caught the bleak morning light. Kaelin did not flinch. He did not look at the blade. He kept his storm-grey eyes fixed on the distant, fragile figure of the servant girl.
Get down.
As the executioner's muscles coiled for the final strike, Kaelin slowly closed his eyes. A quiet, devastating sorrow settled over his heart. He was not afraid to die. He was only deeply, profoundly sorry that he would leave this world without ever hearing her voice. The heavy broadsword began its descent, cutting through the freezing air with a deadly hiss. Stop! It was not a word spoken aloud. It was not a sound at all. It was a sudden, crushing shift in the atmosphere, a wave of absolute, terrifying pressure that slammed into the courtyard like a physical wall. The executioner faltered. His massive arms trembled mid-swing, the blade stopping mere inches from King Kaelin's neck. The brute gasped, his amber eyes going wide as a primal, inexplicable terror seized his chest. His wolf instincts were screaming at him to drop the weapon. Through the dense, silent crowd, a figure was moving. Ilara stepped out from the ranks of the shivering servants. She did not run. She did not rush. She walked with a deliberate, unhurried grace that completely defied the coarse grey linen of her dress. Every step she took seemed to command the very earth beneath her boots. The snow crunched softly underfoot, the only sound in the suffocating silence that had fallen over the thousands of wolves gathered. As she moved forward, the dense crowd instinctively parted. They backed away, their wolves whining softly in confusion and submission, though none of them knew why. 3 armored guards stationed near the execution block snapped out of their daze. They drew their weapons and stepped into her path to block the intruder. Ilara did not slow down. She did not even look at their drawn swords. She simply lifted her pale violet eyes and met the gaze of the lead guard. The absolute, ancient stillness in her stare hit the man like a physical blow. The guard's hands shook. The sword slipped from his grip, clattering against the icy stones. He stumbled backward, dropping to one knee without realizing what his body was doing. His wolf refused to bare its fangs at her. She walked past the kneeling guards and ascended the black stone steps of the execution block. King Kaelin's eyes snapped open. When he saw the fragile, grey-clad girl standing on the platform, his heart stopped. "What are you doing?" Kaelin's voice was a harsh, desperate rasp, completely devoid of his usual alpha composure. He pulled violently against the iron chains anchoring him to the block, trying to force his massive body between her and the executioner. "I told you to stay hidden. Run, Elara, run!" It was the first time he had spoken her name. He had deduced it from the old prophecies of the Silver Moonblood line, realizing she was the lost princess meant to inherit the broken stone. Elara looked down at him. The panic in his storm-grey eyes was entirely for her. Even on his knees, even facing the blade, his only instinct was to protect her. A ghost of a smile, fragile and achingly sad, touched her lips. She shook her head. She turned her back to the king and stepped directly in front of him, using her small, fragile body as a shield against the towering executioner. Up on the viewing balcony, Lord Vane recovered from the initial shock of the atmospheric pressure. His face twisted into an ugly snarl of outrage. "What is this madness?" Vane roared, pointing a trembling finger at the block. "What are you waiting for, you fool? It's a crazed Omega! Cleave them both in half!" False Luna Seraphina, standing beside Vane, suddenly gripped the balcony rail. Her face went deathly pale as she recognized the grey dress, the bruised cheek, and the absolute lack of fear. The girl from the dungeon. The executioner swallowed hard. Driven by the fear of Vane's wrath, he forced his king hands to grip the hilt of the broadsword again. He raised the blade high. "I said, execute them!" Vane bellowed. Elara did not flinch. As the executioner prepared to strike, the freezing wind howled across the platform. It caught the edge of her tattered hood, pulling it back. Her ash-silver hair spilled out, tumbling down her back like liquid moonlight. The crowd gasped. Silver hair was a myth, a legend burned to ashes centuries ago. Elara slowly raised her chin. The crescent moon birthmark on her wrist, previously hidden under her sleeve, was now glowing with a blinding, undeniable silver light. She placed her hand over her chest, right where the cracked white stone rested against her heart, and she looked directly up at Lord Vane. Her pale violet eyes ignited. The oppressive, silent pressure in the air reached a breaking point, making the very stones of the courtyard tremble. Elara parted her lips, taking a deep breath of the freezing air. The 10-year vow of silence was over. The executioner's blade was a mere breath away from Kaelin's neck when Elara spoke. "Kneel." It was not a scream. It was not a shout. Her voice was remarkably calm, resonant and melodic, carrying a strange, echoing timbre that seemed to vibrate from the very bedrock of the Obsidian citadel. It was the voice of the earth, the moon, and the ancient pack laws that had governed their kind since the dawn of time. It was the true command. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The massive executioner did not just stop. His body betrayed him completely. He dropped the heavy broadsword as if it burned his flesh, his knees buckling with such violent force that the bone cracked against the frozen stone. He collapsed, gasping for air, unable to look up. The shockwave of her voice rippled outward across the courtyard. It hit the armored guards first. In perfect, terrifying synchronization, hundreds of soldiers dropped their weapons and crashed to their knees, their armored plates clanking loudly against the cobblestones. Then it hit the crowd. Thousands of wolves, nobles who had sneered, commoners who had cheered, and warriors who had betrayed their king, were forced to the ground. They clutched their chests as their wolves whimpered in absolute biological submission. They could not stand. The blood in their veins recognized the supreme authority of the Silver Moonblood, an authority that no council or usurper could ever override. Up on the viewing balcony, Lord Vane grabbed the stone railing, his face contorted in agony as the command struck him. No! Vane gritted his teeth, his amber eyes flashing as he tried to fight the invisible, crushing weight pushing down on his shoulders. I am the ruler of this pack! But the White Queen's command did not negotiate with traitors. With a sickening thud, Vane was forced down, his knees smashing into the stone floor of the balcony. Beside him, false Luna Seraphina was already on the ground, weeping uncontrollably, her face pressed against the icy stone in primal terror. The entire courtyard, thousands of wolves, knelt before the fragile girl in the grey linen dress. Only one man was spared the weight of her command. King Kaelin knelt on the execution block, but the pressure did not push him down. Instead, the sound of her voice washed over him like a tidal wave of pure, searing light. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, laced with the scent of dried lavender and winter frost. The moment the true Luna's voice entered his ears, the black poison rotting his veins shattered like fragile glass. Kaelin gasped, his chest arching backward. The dark, suffocating fog in his mind evaporated instantly. His black wolf, dormant and dying just seconds ago, roared back to life with a vengeance that shook the king's very soul. His muscles expanded, flooding with supernatural alpha strength. With a feral, deafening roar, Kaelin ripped his arms forward. Crack! The thick iron chains binding his wrists and neck snapped like brittle twigs. The metal links flew across the execution block, ringing against the stone. He was no longer the dying, poisoned prisoner. He was the Alpha King of Obsidian Peak, fully restored by the mate who had bled for him in the dark. Kaelin slowly rose to his feet. His massive frame shadowed Ilara, his storm-grey eyes glowing with an intense golden ring of pure lichen fire. He stood right behind her, a lethal, unstoppable force, entirely submissive to her, yet ready to slaughter anyone who dared to look at her with disrespect. At the center of it all, Ilara stood perfectly still. The cracked white stone pendant resting against her chest began to glow with a brilliant, blinding luminescence. The ancient runes carved into its surface ignited with silver fire. As the light from the moon tear flared, the howling winter wind abruptly died. The violent blizzard that had been burying the courtyard stopped in midair. The snowflakes hung suspended for a fraction of a second before drifting gently, peacefully to the ground. The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in the courtyard kept their head bowed to the snow. They were trembling, not from the cold, but from the horrifying realization of what they had just done. They had mocked her. They had treated her like dirt, and they had gathered to cheer for the execution of the only two people who truly owned the kingdom, the Alpha King and the last living White Queen. The silence in the courtyard was absolute, broken only by the ragged, terrified breathing of Lord Vane. Still pinned to the stone balcony by the crushing weight of Ilara's true command, Vane struggled to lift his head. "Guards!" he choked out, his amber eyes wide with panic. "Kill him! Kill the usurper!" Not a single soldier moved. Their knees remained locked to the frozen earth, their weapons abandoned in the snow. The pack law was ancient and unforgiving. It recognized true strength, and right now, the magic of the silver moonblood pulsing in the air rendered Vane's stolen authority completely void. King Kaelin stepped down from the execution block. The broken iron chains still hung from his wrists, a stark reminder of what the pack had allowed to happen. His storm-grey eyes, now ringed with the predatory gold of his fully awakened wolf, locked onto the balcony. Vane shrank back, the last of his arrogance shattering. Beside him, false Luna Seraphina let out a pathetic, whimpering sob. "Mercy, my king!" Seraphina cried out, crawling toward the edge of the balcony, her expensive white fox furs dragging in the slush. "Vane forced me. I was only trying to survive. Please!" Kaelin didn't even look at her. His gaze remained fixed on Vane. There would be no bloodbath today. A true ruler did not need to bathe in blood to prove his dominance. The sheer, undeniable reality of his return was enough to break his enemies. "You spoke of treason, Vane." Kaelin's voice echoed across the quiet courtyard, deep and deadly cold. "You claimed I abused the laws of our ancestors. Yet it was you who poisoned your alpha. It was you who sought to execute the last living heir of the White Queens, to steal a throne that rejected you." Vane opened his mouth, but no words came out. His wolf was cowering so deeply inside him that he could barely breathe. "I strip you of your titles. I strip you of your lands. You are no longer a lord of Obsidian Peak," Kaelin decreed, the finality of his words ringing like a gavel against stone. "You and your false Luna are exiled to the frozen wastes. If you ever cross the borders of this kingdom again, the winter winds will be the least of your worries." Vane collapsed entirely, weeping into the cold stone. The illusion of his power was dead. Kaelin turned his back on the traitors and looked out at the thousands of wolves kneeling in the snow. These were his people. The same people who had mocked him. The same people who had treated the fragile woman behind him like invisible dirt for a decade. Tremors of shame ran through the crowd. Men and women who had sneered at Ilara's grey dress now pressed their foreheads into the freezing snow, weeping in profound, pack-level regret. They had been blind. They had worshipped false power while true royalty scrubbed their flaws. But Kaelin did not address the crowd. He turned, his heavy boots crunching on the snow, and walked back up the steps of the execution block. Ilara stood there, the violent storm of her true command settling back into the quiet, absolute stillness that had always defined her. The brilliant light of the moon tear faded to a soft, pulsing silver against her chest. She looked at the massive, battle-scarred king approaching her.
This cannot be.
Kaelin stopped 2 feet away. He was the most feared alpha in the continent, a conqueror fully restored to his lethal glory. Yet, as he looked down at the bruised cheek and the torn, mud-stained dress of the servant girl, his fierce, golden-grey eyes softened with an unbearable weight of sorrow. He did not reach for her. He did not pull her into his arms to claim her in front of his pack, the way a lesser alpha would have. Instead, King Kaelan dropped to one knee. A collective gasp, stifled by awe, rippled through the kneeling crowd. The Alpha King was bowing to no one but her. "I swore an oath to protect the weak when I took the throne," Kaelan said, his gravelly voice carrying loud enough for the trembling court to hear his confession. "But I was blind. I sat in a fortress of stone, while the true heart of this kingdom bled in the shadows. I allowed my people to treat you with cruelty. I failed you, Elara." He bowed his head, baring his neck to her, the ultimate gesture of submission from a lichen. "I do not ask for your forgiveness," Kaelan continued softly, speaking only to her now. "I only ask for the chance to spend the rest of my life proving that my loyalty belongs to you, and only you." Elara stared down at the massive man kneeling in the snow. Her pale violet eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with a profound, overwhelming warmth. The 10 years of cold, lonely survival in the shadows began to melt away. Slowly, Elara reached her small, calloused hand into the pocket of her frayed grey dress. She pulled out the cracked obsidian signet ring she had rescued from the filth of the dungeon floor. She opened her palm, holding the heavy black stone out to him. Kaelan lifted his head. He looked at the ring, then at the fragile, bruised hand offering it back to him. Slowly, gently, he raised his massive, chained hands and wrapped them around hers, waiting for the White Queen to decide their fate. Elara looked down at the massive, scarred hands of the Alpha King wrapped gently around hers. He was not demanding her grace, he was waiting for it. The fierce, untouchable conqueror had laid his entire existence at the feet of a servant girl, trusting her with a vulnerability he had never shown another living soul. Elara did not speak. She had broken her vow of silence to save his life, but some truths were too profound for words. Instead, she curled her small fingers around his. With a quiet, steady strength, she pulled upward. King Kaelan understood. He rose to his feet, towering over her once more. His storm-grey eyes, rimmed with the fierce gold of his awakened wolf, locked onto hers with a devotion so deep it seemed to anchor the very earth beneath them. He took the cracked obsidian ring from her palm and slid it back onto his finger, right where it belonged. Then, Kaelan turned to the nearest kneeling guard. "Your cloak," Kaelan commanded, his voice a low, undeniable rumble. The guard scrambled to unfasten the heavy, fur-lined winter cloak from his shoulders, offering it up with trembling hands. Kaelan took it and draped it carefully over Elara's shivering shoulders, pulling the thick fur tight to shield her from the freezing wind. He offered her his arm. Elara slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, stepping close to his side. Together, they walked back toward the Obsidian Citadel. The sea of thousands of wolves parted for them, leaving a wide, clear path through the snow. No one dared to raise their head. The oppressive, mocking laughter that had filled the courtyard earlier that morning was completely gone, replaced by a fearful, reverent awe. The heavy iron doors of the high hall stood open. As they crossed the threshold, the warmth of the silver torches washed over them. The hall that had witnessed Kaelin's betrayal and Ilara's silent suffering just hours ago now felt entirely different. It felt like a temple waiting for its gods to return. They walked in unison down the long black marble aisle. At the far end stood the Obsidian throne, carved from a single massive block of volcanic rock. Kaelin led her up the dark stone steps. He did not sit. He turned to face the vast hall, standing shoulder to shoulder with the fragile woman in the grey dress and the oversized cloak. As they stood together before the throne, something ancient and beautiful happened. The cracked white stone resting against Ilara's chest pulsed with a soft, pure silver light. In response, the cracked obsidian ring on Kaelin's finger began to hum, emitting a deep, warm, golden glow. The two stones, one representing the fierce strength of the Alpha King, the other the sacred authority of the White Queen, resonated. The fractures in the stones did not magically disappear. The scars of their past remained. But as the silver and gold light merged, wrapping around the two rulers, the cracks were filled with a radiant, unbreakable bond. The throne itself seemed to exhale, recognizing the harmony of true, fated power. Slowly, the nobles, the warriors, and the servants filed into the high hall. They did not fill the space with whispers or political chatter. One by one, row by row, the entire pack dropped to their knees on the black marble floor. They bowed their heads, offering their absolute loyalty to the king who had bled for